begin here with a discussion, throwing a couple of questions. First, Robert, as you probably know, and the report actually points out, UNODC has been involved in the issue and linking, in some ways, at least in very specific points, criminal activities and the issue of fake medicines. But perhaps in a very ironic way, it is perhaps the patient who could first spot the existence of a scam, or a situation that would point out an illegal activity. With all this in mind, and with the mechanism that has just been created, how do you see your role in strengthening and pushing forward this mechanism, especially because you're the first victim, or we are the first victim?
Sure. Well, responding to that, I mean, certainly from the patient's viewpoint, we have no concerns about trade barriers or issues about that, you know, whether it's generic or branded medication. I mean, what we want to know is that when we go to a pharmacist or a doctor and we are prescribed a medication, that we are indeed getting what we've been offered. I see the role of the patient probably not as to be the first point of call in identifying the problem, because, you know, we're not professionals, we're not part of, we're the end point of the supply chain rather than early on in the supply chain. But I do see the role of patient organisations and patients in terms of stimulating awareness of the problem, communicating the risks, communicating the need for vigilance, and helping to lobby for improvements in the supply chain that will guarantee that the products we take are genuine. And I also see that, from what David said, that then we have a legitimate part in that debate about who should get the drugs, when should we get the drugs, the need for innovation, the need for funding in health systems to guarantee that these products are available. But for us, it's crystal clear, this is an issue, it's a crime, and it should be stopped.
Going to the other side of the spectrum, Martin, also having this mechanism established, what does it change in your relationship, for example, with governments, and especially, as Professor Taylor just mentioned, how can we separate the issue of generics and the issue of fake medicines in a very efficient way so both can have its form, and especially the fake medicine issue can be tackled?
So thank you. About the mechanism, for us, there is some element in what has been discussed in Buenos Aires, which is of key importance, is the role of the different stakeholders. And so the pharmaceutical industry have been working with Impact, and before that with some other stakeholders, to find a solution in the fight against counterfeit medicine. And with the clinical death of Impact, our role was discussed. And so the mechanism is for the moment a purely state-driven mechanism, and we agreed on that certainly, but we welcome the fact that in the future there will be room for the discussion with different stakeholders, and we think that pharmaceutical industry has competencies, key competencies to bring into the discussion.
It is true that during Impact there was a discussion, especially from some emerging countries, putting questions whether that structure was the correct one. How do you see this debate today? Do you think you can overcome that perhaps bad environment that was created at one point into a more positive atmosphere today with the new structure?
Yes, we think that we can change that. The key perspective from IAPO and from different associations and companies is that we have to address a public health threat. And that's what we're working on now. I can say that because so I'm part of this new work stream at IAPO, and I know exactly on what we're working, and it's certainly about this public health threat. And just consider the situation very fact-based. Our company, and certainly Sanofi, my company, we commercialize both branded and generic medicines. So we have the same problems on the different sides. One of the key problems we faced was about malaria compounds, and that has nothing to do with IP. There is no IP protection on those compounds. So we are very aware and fully aware of the public health threat.
How did you do with the malaria case, for example?
With
the malaria case you just mentioned, what was the follow-up that you actually did to try to solve or to create awareness that your product was the right one and not the others?
Different streams, so we have to work with regulatory bodies when there are, because as you know, so malaria compounds are mostly for African countries and some countries in Southeast Asia. And so what we face is sometimes the weaknesses of regulatory bodies. We also work with police in place or with international organizations like Interpol. So we try to put forces together to solve those problems. But it's a systemic approach, and we can't work alone on that, certainly not.
Look, you wrote you took part at least in a recent article in BMJ, and you mentioned how difficult it is to tackle this issue when actually several definitions are being put at the same time, and this sort of weakens the solution for the problem. How do you see next steps, since there's no definition yet of dividing what is the phase, false one, what is the substandard? How do you deal with this if they're still under one umbrella?
First of all, I think there is some definition that are available. The big problem is that it's usually differ from one country to another. In country where there is definition, and there is other country where definitely there is no definition at all. You also may have to consider that in the same country you can have differences in whether it's defined in the public health code, laws, and whether it's defined in IP laws. And that's also always a tricky thing. Now you see more and more in the scheme where there is counterfeit medicine that is intruded either in the legal or illegal chain in a specific country. That is no more one country only, but it's produced in one country, translating through another, possibly managed by a third country, an individual established in a third country, for patients in a fourth country. And that's when you come to this level of complexity of this supply chain, that you are facing the problem of different definition. And to some extent, you have some regional activities that are aiming to define or to establish a single definition. But still, this definition is always subject to suspicion, because whether it's for to protect IP or whether it's to protect patient activities. And from our perspective, we need to maybe have a new mechanism to develop a generally agreed definition that would then be helpful to develop proper legislation, proper understanding, that would then enable improved international coordination and collaboration to fight effectively against these elements. We also need to keep in mind that the people, now more and more, the people that are behind this are major criminal organizations. These are powerful people, and to that extent, we need to have the strong tools that will enable us, all the private stakeholders, all the public stakeholders, government, to fight effectively against this threat.
In your institution, what have you been doing specifically in order to raise awareness of your membership?
We have developed a few items, and maybe two elements to consider is, on one hand, we need to develop proactive communication. Proactive communication meaning informing patients before a case occurs, to prevent patients from either buying over the internet to illegitimate or unauthorized sources, but also to help improve the practice of the pharmacist in the way they buy medicines to a reliable trader or wholesalers. So this proactive element is really more trying to prevent, but also it's preparing for a reactive communication. When there is a case of counterfeit medicine discovered in the supply chain or in a country, how to react properly, how to make sure that this is a balance between informing the patient about the specific case, but at the same time not necessarily over-threaten or over-frighten an individual about these cases. We need still to remember that the patients, when they take medicines in a huge proportion of the cases, it will be for the entire benefit of the patient. And this is always a tension we have to consider that. How do we manage the recall? How do we manage the threat or the feeling of threat by the patient there? And usually that's why healthcare professionals are quite effective tools to improve the communication with patients also when there is a crisis, because they can basically have answers with a healthcare professional. For that extent, we have developed framework for guidelines and for tools to help pharmacists to better communicate on counterfeit medicine risk. We have developed tools to help them develop visual inspections of product. We also have developed a few raising awareness events at regional level through the World Health Professional Alliance. So then it's not only pharmacist driven, but it's all healthcare professionals that have a common views and common programs to improve communications and to improve their practice to prevent intrusion in the supply chain of counterfeit medicine.
Robert?
Yeah, thank you for letting me come back on that, because I mean, I don't disagree in any way with anything you said, but I think this is part of a more general thrust where we need to begin to develop a culture around the world where the patients and the health professionals are more equal and they do communicate in a much more open way together. I mean, I'm very aware that in different cultures in the world, you know, the doctor is God and the patient just does what they're told, and whatever they're told to take, they take it to the best of their ability, even if they have side effects or if they have some doubts about anything. I think we need to move away from that at a speed that's appropriate in each culture towards a situation where the doctor and the patient, or the pharmacist and the patient, or the nurse and the patient are much more friends, partners in health. It's much easier to communicate, so if you have any doubts about anything, it's not a question of being intimidated by the health professional. The health professional is actually eager to listen to the patient because of the possible knowledge they can get from that, so that whether it's a genuine side effect from an appropriate and legitimate product, or whether it's something that shouldn't be happening, it's much easier to communicate that, and then it will be much easier to identify problems and issues and go ahead and resolve those issues. So I think it's part of that general process of, if you like, democratizing the process of patient-doctor-physician relationship.
Professor, actually in your report you do talk about early warning. How, and basically you suggest that this should be strengthened and investment on this issue should be put. How do you see the way forward for an early warning mechanism there?
I'm not sure it's for me to specify that specifically. To say that's desirable, to say that WHO centrally, cities like Geneva would be a great place to have a unit which is linking up with regulatory agencies across the world, linking up with professional bodies across the world, pooling intelligence, commissioning where necessary specific pieces of research to assess scale. The opportunity is there to do it, and probably, as I said, with the wisdom of retrospect, this should have been done decades ago. I think people were keen to address the problem. I think the audience probably needs to have a thought before I go on, but there are a couple of points I'd like to add at some point.
Go ahead. This is the time.
Okay. Well, first of all, the research-based industry has a legitimate interest in this area. There's no doubt there are issues of reputation, issues of product quality, which mean that it is perfectly sensible for the manufacturers of products to wish to defend the integrity of their brands, the integrity of their production. I happen to believe, and through my working life I've worked with UK government, other things, that the research-based industry is an important human asset. In the West and elsewhere we shouldn't lose sight of that, but I think it's often pilloried quite wrongly. At the same time, the generics industry has done a fantastic job across the world in bringing what were once new technologies to mass use. There may be some companies at the margin, as in any other area, there may be some individuals who abuse it were ever the case that, for example, governments knowingly permitted poor quality product or false product to be dumped in vulnerable communities like those of sub-Saharan Africa, then clearly the world community's got a responsibility for controlling that, but we shouldn't in some way undermine the name of the generics pharmaceutical industry. There was this famous case in Holland where medicines produced legitimately in India were in transit to Brazil, where they again was perfectly legal, they should be sold, and they were intercepted by the Dutch police, so I think probably acting in good faith, and that precipitated this whole concern about, is there an illicit attack on the generics industry going on? I think the answer is that was an error, and what it should be clear now that there's no way that's going on. Having said that, the big problem for all of this is world health. Yes, we've got some technologies which control health. We've still got 1 billion, 2 billion people across the world who are not getting even minimal access. Even in emergent economies like India, we've got several 100 million individuals who've got no access, no satisfactory access at all to modern medicines. So it's great that the Indian industry, for example, has helped world access to HIV medicines. We need, though, to address those residual problems of large populations with no access to everyday treatments or very inadequate access, and that's what we need to work together. Yes, we address the issues of pharmaceutical crime, but we look at how we've collectively so far, whether it's professional groups, whether it's pharmacy, medicine, industry of all sorts, governments, we still haven't completed the good job of global demographic transition. If we don't do that rapidly and don't do that equitably, we're all in major trouble over the next half century. So that's the big thing to focus on, and to keep all these issues in balance.
Martin, Professor Taylor just mentioned the case in the Netherlands. How did that hurt, let's say, the dialogue between governments, or did that actually facilitate or strengthen the path in order to discuss the real issues and push them forward?
Well, as Professor Taylor said, I think now there is a general agreement that it was an error, and also from company perspective, and Sanofi was involved, and Sanofi admitted that it was an error, and took the commitment not to do this type of enforcement, and we said that publicly, so now it's very clear. Certainly, from a communication and public relation perspective, it was a disaster. And it broke the discussion process. We could lead before that with some states or with some international institution, and we had some collateral damages, maybe with some difficulties we face within the impact group also. So maybe, well, the advantage now is putting an emphasis on the need of a clarification of what is falsified medicine or counterfeit medicine, and the need for a very clear concept. What does that mean? Behind the difficult translation we could have from one language to another, really defining the concept to know on what we have to work as an international community.
What do you expect to happen at the WHO assembly this next year, and during the whole year, actually, in order to redefine or push closer to a definition?
Oh, well, unluckily there hasn't been a strong discussion on the definition in Buenos Aires. Maybe this discussion will happen during the next WHA. I think it's necessary that our member states ready for that. I don't know, and I can't tell anything about that because I'm not inside a member state discussion. It's obvious. But yes, let's hope that there is clarification on that.
For the patients, does it matter if there's a definition, or actually you want the safe drug, and whatever process it takes?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the individual patient just wants the safe drug. Those of us in patient organisations want to help facilitate the process to make sure that the drugs are safe. And so for us, I mean, we'd be very happy to participate in any discussion about definitions and so on. I think one of the things I'd like to emphasise is that it's not just that we should be there because we represent the users at the end result of the product. You know, I think patients and patient groups are a very important part of society. They're a very important potential lobby organisation. And, you know, to have us there involved in these things will actually help facilitate the development and the understanding at national level as well and at regional level. Because if you have a strong lobby of patient groups saying, you know, for heaven's sake, governments, get this sorted out, you know, our lives are at risk. I agree with David, we don't have to get too melodramatic. But, you know, what we want to do is we want to act in a precautionary way, an anticipatory way. We want to make sure that these issues don't occur. And so I think those of us whose role is to represent patients need to be at the forefront of this process. And it will be to everybody's advantage that we are, because, you know, everybody can say that, you know, the pharmaceutical industry or whatever, you know, they have a business reason for wanting this to happen. But from a patient's point of view, we don't have that market orientation. We don't have that possibility of profit or loss. We have the issue of life or death or health or non-health. And, you know, it's harder for democratic governments and indeed non-democratic governments to argue with a strong voice from within the patient movement than it is to argue with a professional vested interest.
Just a last question before we open to the floor to our guests. Look, the internet, how did it change this fight, or how did it amplify this problem, and how is your institution dealing with pharmacies that are basically only online? I don't know if you have the same problem as us journalists. The online news, sometimes it can kill the physical newspaper, sometimes it can give life to it. So what is happening in this front?
For us, I mean, internet pharmacy is not a question of business. It's clearly an element of uncertainty to the patients. What extent patients that go on a website can clearly identify if this is a legitimate or illegitimate pharmacy. And that is always the difficulties. If I show you some pictures and tell you which one is legitimate, the patients, even as highly educated people among this room, you will have a big problem to define this. It's very simple. In a country where there is no internet pharmacy, it's quite simple to communicate on this, meaning no internet pharmacy is allowed. Therefore, if you buy online in that particular country, you can be sure it's illegal. And it's likely that you may have higher proportion of counterfeit medicines. WHO has quantified that at least 50% of non-authorized medicines sold over the internet are counterfeits if it's through a non-authorized e-pharmacy. So that is one point. When you are dealing with a country that allows e-pharmacy, then our key message is can we secure the system? Through accreditation system, through ensuring there is proper quality. We are now working with, for instance, the NABP, the National Association of Board of Pharmacy, that has been involved in a system to accredit pharmacy online to see how we can further improve this system. But clearly the problem is not so much certification or not certification. It's also making sure that the patients understand, know the certification. Another key element also to consider is that we should not always state that patients go online as angels. Some of them go online because they know that their request will not be acceptable in an authorized pharmacy. That could be for any reasons. They could have big problems to discuss about dysfunctions, erectile dysfunctions. They could have also some addiction to some medicines, and they know that they would require a prescription to do this. So that's also something we need to keep in mind. Not only we're thinking that the intentions are pure from any side, but also we need to see that this is something to consider. And I remember that a few years ago, one of the reports of a UN agency in Vienna in charge of narcotic control has also stated that now internet pharmacy is becoming an important source of provision of supply for the people with such addiction there. So that's not that simple to say internet pharmacy, if we can secure them, this would solve the problem. It's also now a good system. And the complexity of this is that you have 3 different streams of input in this system. The first one, getting the order. So how do you get the patients sending his order to the pharmacy? That will be one stream. The second one is how do you transit the financial, the money, and that would be a second stream. That would be using different stream. The third one is how do you have it delivered at home? And we have very complex system where basically 3 different groups are involved in 3 different countries with this order, making it more difficult. And so, for instance, even the producer that may be established in China or in any other countries will then even ship the product without even knowing how it was the price paid and without knowing who was the one who gave the orders there. So there's a huge complexity. And one of the big challenges of internet is that a national regulation is even less effective on internet counterfeit medicines than on normal counterfeit medicines.
Very good. I'd like to open to all of you if you have any questions, either to the author of the report or to any of the other guests. Please feel free.